They built 96 houses on my land, not by accident, on purpose. I inherited 47 acres in Colorado from my grandfather. Paid off and pristine. I went to visit the property for the first time in 3 years and found an entire subdivision where my forest used to be. Paved roads, streetlights, families moving furniture into houses they'd paid $485,000 each for. The HOA president, a woman who'd never worked an honest day but wore a Rolex like a badge, told me to my face that I was a deadbeat squatter trying to scam hardworking families. Said her lawyer confirmed the land was abandoned, so adverse possession made it legally theirs. She'd already deposited $16 million in pre-sales. Here's what I did. Absolutely nothing. Let them finish construction. Watched them landscape, paint, install pools. Then I walked into federal court with my grandfather's original 1971 deed. What would you do if someone built a neighborhood on your property? Drop your state below. Let's see where my land rights family's watching from. My name's Dakota Flint. Yeah, like the stone. 47 years old. Structural engineer. Divorced. I drive a 2008 Silverado that burns a quart of oil every month. Nothing special about me, except one thing. My grandfather left me 47 acres of Colorado forest worth about $4.2 million. William Flint bought that land in 1971 for $8,200 cash. Depression-era guy. Kept every receipt in leather ledgers that smelled like pipe tobacco and WD-40. When he died in 2019, he left me the property with one note tucked inside the deed. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. I didn't visit for 3 years. Divorce, 2 kids in college, 70-hour work weeks. But I paid property taxes every April. $6,400 annually. Never late, always online. I had the email receipts. August 2022, I finally drove up to scatter Grandpa's ashes. Turned off Highway 36 onto the old fire road, and my stomach dropped. The pine forest was gone. In its place, 96 Mediterranean stucco houses with fake balconies and HOA-mandated beige paint. When I tell people this story, they always ask the same question. How do you lose 47 acres without knowing it? Short answer, you don't. They take it from you slowly, piece by piece, under 1,000 pages of paperwork and a smile. When I pulled up that August morning, I thought I'd made a wrong turn. The coordinates were right. 39.732 degree N, 105.481 degree Babu, burned into my memory from the property tax receipts. But where there should have been forest, there were driveways, kids on scooters, and mailboxes with shiny new numbers. I parked the Silverado at the edge of what used to be a dirt trail and stepped out. The smell hit me first. Fresh paint, asphalt, fertilizer. Not pine, not soil, not home. A man in a neon safety vest waved at me from a half-finished cul-de-sac. You lost, bud? He shouted over the hum of a leaf blower. I didn't answer. I just stared past him at the lot markers. Block C, Lot 14, Birch Creek Estates. My land had a name now. A logo. An HOA. I drove straight to the development's temporary office. A prefab trailer with glass doors and a banner that read, Homes starting in the 480s. Inside, air conditioning hummed and the smell of coffee and printer toner filled the space. Behind the desk sat Eleanor Graves, HOA President and Developer Liaison. 60, maybe 65. Platinum blonde hair, diamond earrings, confidence like armor. She looked up from her tablet, smiled that practiced real estate smile. Can I help you? Yeah, I said. You already have. I laid my tax bill on her desk. This land is mine. Her smile didn't falter. I think you're mistaken, Mr. Flint. Dakota Flint. She tapped a few keys on her screen, pretending to search. No, Mr. Flint. The county records show this parcel as abandoned. Ownership reverted to the HOA trust 2 years ago. Funny, I said. The county still cashes my tax checks. Her eyebrows lifted just a fraction, enough to tell me she knew exactly what I was talking about. Then you should take that up with them. We operate under legal counsel. Everything here is above board. That was her mistake. Everything was her word for nothing I can back up. I walked the site for hours after that meeting. No one stopped me. No one thought to. I was invisible among landscapers and moving vans. But I saw everything. Property stakes, zoning markers, and something else. Survey tape with my grandfather's initials burned into the old posts beneath them. WF 1971. They hadn't just built over it. They'd erased it. That night I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't call a lawyer. I drove home, sat at my kitchen table, and poured a glass of whiskey. The good stuff. The kind I keep for bad days. I opened my grandfather's ledger, the one that still smelled like his workshop. Inside were yellowed survey maps, receipts, and a notarized deed from Jefferson County Recorder's Office, dated June 14, 1971, and there it was, Parcel number 17480302. The same one listed under Birch Creek Estates Phase 3 on their glossy brochure, My Property. That night, I knew what Grandpa meant. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. But I also knew better than to storm in waving paperwork. People like Eleanor only understand one thing: loss. So I decided I'd give her one. I was going to let her finish every house, sell every one of them, and dig her own grave. One invoice, one closing, one smiling photo op at a time. I didn't need to stop her. I just needed to be patient. Patience isn't easy when every fiber in your body wants to tear something down. But I'd learned restraint the hard way, through a divorce, a decade in construction management, and one too many bosses who mistook silence for weakness. So I decided to turn my anger into homework. I started by pulling every public record I could find. Jefferson County Planning Department, Zoning Commission, building permits. Most of it was online. Digital breadcrumbs left by lazy clerks and overconfident developers. Each one told a story. And when I connected the dots, that story got ugly fast. The original Birch Creek Estates proposal was for Phase 1 and Phase 2, totaling 128 acres, nowhere near my grandfather's 47-acre parcel. But 6 months after Grandpa died, a boundary adjustment request appeared, filed by a company called Evergreen Development Group, approved by the same zoning committee Eleanor's husband chaired. The adjustment added exactly 47.03 acres. Coincidence? Not a chance. The approval documents even listed an inactive owner, my grandfather's name, William Flint, stamped with deceased. The problem was, there was no legal transfer, no title change, no quitclaim deed. They had simply taken it. I drove back out to the property 2 weeks later, pretending to be an inspector. Wore my old reflective vest, clipboard, even borrowed a friend's laser measurer. Nobody questioned me. Contractors see a clipboard and assume you're in charge. I walked the entire perimeter, taking photos, jotting GPS coordinates, marking every spot where their survey lines overlapped mine. I noticed one thing. Their stakes were all new plastic markers, maybe 6 months old. But under some of them I found rusted iron rebar, the kind surveyors used decades ago. Grandpa's rebar. He'd marked that property line himself in 1971. That was my smoking gun. When I got home, I laid out everything on my kitchen floor. Tax records, GPS data, photos, maps, old ledgers. It looked like the war room of a man planning something bigger than revenge. And maybe I was. Next, I called an old college friend, Paul Henderson, now a real estate attorney. I didn't tell him the full story right away, just asked how long someone could build on land without ownership before it became adverse possession. He laughed. Not easily. You'd need at least 18 years of uncontested open occupancy and payment of taxes to even argue that. Why? Because an HOA president says she owns my land after 2 years. The line went quiet. Then Paul said, "You have documentation?" "I've got everything," he exhaled. "Then you're sitting on a gold mine. Don't stop them. Let them finish." Those 5 words stuck. Let them finish. Over the next year, I played dumb. Drove by once a month, camera hidden in my dash, recording the progress. Houses rose like teeth out of the red soil. Roads paved over my grandfather's deer trails. Families moved in, proud, clueless. And all the while, every nail, every light pole, every mailbox was technically mine. By the time construction wrapped, the project was worth nearly $40 million. Eleanor held a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Champagne, news cameras. The mayor smiling like a puppet. I stood at the edge of the crowd, unseen. She gave a speech about revitalizing forgotten land and building community where there was none. And I realized she actually believed she'd won. But what she didn't know was that every brick she laid, every house she sold was tightening a noose around her neck. Because when the time came, I wasn't going to shout or protest or beg. I was going to walk into court with one document, the original deed, and let the law burn her kingdom to the ground. By the time winter rolled around, Birch Creek Estates was in full bloom. Beige walls, trimmed hedges, smiling families unloading groceries into garages that technically stood on my soil. I'd driven through the neighborhood 6 times by then, pretending to be lost, or a potential buyer. Nobody looked twice. Every time, I felt the same cocktail of emotions: rage, disbelief, and a strange, icy calm that kept me from doing something stupid. My grandfather used to say, "Revenge is a dish best served with receipts," so that's what I collected. I spent hours at the county records office, learning every trick those developers used. They'd bribed someone, had to. The signature approving the boundary shift wasn't even from the county engineer. It was from an acting deputy whose employment record vanished 6 months later. The approval stamp didn't match the others. The file metadata showed edits made after the date of approval. Every layer I peeled back smelled more and more like rot. Eleanor Goodwin, HOA President, developer's best friend, queen of fake smiles, had built her empire on fraud. But proving that wasn't enough. Not yet. See, if I'd gone to the press or filed a complaint then, they'd have buried it under bureaucracy. The homeowners would have screamed panic. The county would have investigated. And in the end, they would have offered me pennies in a settlement, if they admitted anything at all. So I waited. I wanted them to finish every last home. Let the buyers close. The mortgage companies sign. The utilities install meters. The deeper the roots, the harder the fall. Meanwhile, I became a ghost in their world, quietly, methodically documenting everything. Drone photos, video footage, satellite overlays. I even used a friend's surveying drone to map the entire subdivision. And when we layered that over my grandfather's 1971 plat, the overlap was perfect. 47 acres, stolen clean. One morning, while sipping burnt diner coffee, I got an alert on my phone. Birch Creek Estates was officially listed on Zillow. 96 homes, all move-in ready. I opened one of the listings out of curiosity. The photos showed manicured lawns, smiling families, granite kitchens. Then I noticed something small but infuriating. Every property line in the listing was outlined using my coordinates. They were literally advertising stolen boundaries. That's when I knew it was time to escalate. I called Paul again. He listened quietly as I laid everything out, the drone maps, tax receipts, title history. When I was done, he said, "Dakota, this isn't just civil fraud. This is racketeering. You've got enough here for a federal case." We filed quietly. No press, no threats, no warnings. Just a clean, cold packet of evidence dropped on a federal clerk's desk. The lawsuit named Eleanor Goodwin, Evergreen Development Group, and 3 members of the zoning board. Grounds: fraudulent title manipulation, illegal land seizure, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. Then we waited. 3 weeks later, I got the call I'd been dreaming of. A federal marshal needed me to verify property boundaries for a subpoena. That meant one thing: the court had accepted the case. I drove out that evening, parked just outside the subdivision. Kids were riding bikes, sprinklers ticked across the lawns. For the first time in years, I felt peace, not because I'd won, but because I finally knew justice was coming. Eleanor still strutted around like she owned the place, smiling at her neighbors, sipping her $8 lattes. She had no clue what was about to hit her. Because soon, that Rolex on her wrist would be the last piece of property she could legally claim. When the subpoena hit, Birch Creek Estates might as well have been struck by lightning. Overnight, the calm suburban hum turned into chaos. Certified letters arrived on doorsteps. County surveyors rolled in with tripods and GPS gear. A black SUV from the U.S. Marshals parked at the entrance for 2 full days. And at the center of it all, Eleanor Goodwin, queen of beige castles, stood trembling in her designer wedges, trying to explain why the entire neighborhood was built on someone else's land. I wasn't there to see her face when she got served, but Paul sent me a photo one of his paralegals snapped outside the courthouse. Eleanor, red-faced, clutching the subpoena envelope like it was radioactive. For the first time, the HOA president who used to bark orders over group emails looked small, powerless. But here's the thing. The homeowners weren't my enemies. They were victims too. They'd put down life savings, signed mortgages, believed the lies. So I told Paul, "We're not burning the neighborhood down. We're going after the thieves." He nodded. "That's exactly what the judge will want to hear." Still, that didn't stop Eleanor's people from trying to spin it. The HOA's social page started posting vague land ownership disputes disclaimers, painting me as some greedy opportunist trying to extort hard-working families. I ignored it. The truth doesn't need to shout when it's got paperwork. The first court hearing was surreal. I walked into that marble building wearing my best pair of jeans, boots polished, and a button-down that still smelled faintly of motor oil. Eleanor arrived in pearls, flanked by her lawyer, a man with slicked-back hair and a watch worth more than my truck. He strutted like he owned the courtroom, flipping through folders with rehearsed disdain. When the judge entered, everything fell quiet. Paul stood first. "Your Honor," he began, "my client, Mr. Flint, is the rightful owner of the property known as Birch Creek Estates. The defendants knowingly developed and sold this land without authorization, falsifying county documents and profiting from property that was never theirs." Eleanor's attorney smirked. "Your Honor, my client's development company acted in full accordance with state and county regulations. The land was deemed abandoned under adverse possession statutes after decades of neglect. Mr. Flint is attempting to claim windfall profit from the good faith work of others." I almost laughed out loud. "Abandoned? I paid taxes every year. I had receipts, bank records, and county statements to prove it. Paul didn't flinch. He opened a binder and slid it across the table to the clerk. Exhibit A, he said. 43 years of tax records, notarized and time-stamped. The smirk vanished. Then Paul dropped the hammer. Exhibit B, certified drone surveys showing all 96 homes built entirely within Mr. Flint's legal boundary. He flipped to the next page. Exhibit C, metadata proving the county approval file was edited months after its supposed certification. Exhibit D, signed affidavit from the former deputy clerk who processed the original deed transfer, confirming no abandonment proceedings were ever filed. The room went silent. Even the judge leaned forward. "Is this accurate, counsel?" she asked Eleanor's lawyer. He cleared his throat and muttered something about needing to review. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You'll have your chance. But I'll tell you right now, this is looking less like a misunderstanding and more like organized fraud." Eleanor's face drained of color. Outside, as we left the courthouse, Paul turned to me and said, "They'll try to settle before the next hearing. Bet you a steak dinner." He was right. 2 days later, I got an email, an invitation to discuss potential resolution terms. That's lawyer speak for please don't ruin us. But I wasn't interested in their hush money. I wanted every lie exposed, every crooked deal dragged into daylight. Because when they built those houses on my land, they didn't just steal dirt and trees. They stole my grandfather's legacy, and I was about to take it all back, every last square foot. They thought I'd take the money. That was their first mistake. The settlement offer came wrapped in gold, $3.2 million wired immediately, plus a non-disclosure agreement thick enough to choke a horse. Paul and I sat across from their team in a glass-walled conference room overlooking downtown Denver. Their lawyer, the slick-haired one, smiled like a man trying to sell a lie he no longer believed in. "Mr. Flint," he said smoothly, "everyone here understands your emotional connection to this land. But let's be practical. These homes are occupied. Families live there. Taking this to trial would destroy lives." I leaned forward. "You mean your profits?" He didn't blink. "I mean stability, Mr. Flint. You could walk away right now a multimillionaire." I looked him dead in the eye. "You built your dream on my dirt. You'll give me more than hush money. You'll give me names, documents, every person who signed off on this theft." Silence. Then Eleanor's voice cut through the room, sharp, cold, cracking. "You can't undo this. The land is ours now. You think a piece of paper from 1971 is going to stand up against a whole community?" I smiled. "That piece of paper built your entire community." Paul slid the NDA back across the table. "We'll see you in court." By the time the trial date was set, word had spread. News crews started camping outside Birch Creek Estates. Headlines read, "Developer faces land fraud suit, 96 homes in legal limbo." Homeowners were furious, scared, demanding answers from Eleanor. The once perfect HOA meetings turned into shouting matches. Someone leaked the lawsuit documents online. I didn't do it, but I didn't mind that it happened. For the first time, I wasn't the villain. I was the guy who'd been robbed, and people were starting to see it. The trial began in mid-January. Snow covered the courthouse steps, and reporters shouted questions as we walked in. Paul kept his head down. I didn't. I wanted Eleanor to see me calm. The same steady tone I learned from Grandpa. Never raise your voice when the truth can do it for you. The prosecution laid out everything like a roadmap. The forged documents, the bribes to zoning officials, the fake deputy's signature. Paul brought up witnesses, county employees, inspectors, even a homeowner who'd noticed odd discrepancies on his survey. Each testimony built the same picture, deliberate fraud. Then came the defense. They tried to paint me as an opportunist, an absentee landowner who let his property rot. They paraded photos of happy families in my houses, kids on bikes, barbecues in backyards. The message was simple. Look at all the good that came from this mistake. But mistakes don't come with bank transfers labeled expedited permit approval. When Paul cross-examined Eleanor, the air in that courtroom turned electric. He walked her through the paper trail. Each falsified signature, each missing receipt, each email between her and the developers. Her confidence cracked like ice under a slow thaw. "Mrs. Goodwin," Paul asked, voice low, "did you ever visit the county office to confirm ownership before construction began?" Her lawyer objected. Overruled. Eleanor's jaw worked, but no sound came out. "Did you, Mrs. Goodwin?" Finally, she said, "No." Paul nodded, almost kindly. "So, you built 96 homes on land you never verified you owned." Her hands trembled. "We trusted the developers." Paul smiled faintly. "And now you'll all have to answer for that trust," the gallery whispered. Reporters scribbled. The judge called for recess, but the damage was done. Outside, the sky had gone gray, heavy with snow. I watched Eleanor climb into her black SUV, head low, her perfect suburban crown slipping. I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. What I felt was something deeper. The kind of quiet storm that comes before the real reckoning. Because I knew what was coming next. The federal fraud charges hadn't even been unsealed yet. When the federal charges dropped, it was like a bomb going off in a cul-de-sac. The morning it hit the news, my phone buzzed non-stop, local stations, national outlets, even a few real estate blogs were circling like hawks. Developer and HOA president indicted in multi-million-dollar land fraud scheme. The photos they used were the ones taken on the courthouse steps. Eleanor and her pearl necklace, glaring like the world had betrayed her. It hadn't. She'd betrayed herself. By noon, federal agents were seen walking into the Evergreen Development Group's downtown offices with cardboard boxes. They came out an hour later carrying computers, files, and one very sweaty-looking vice president in handcuffs. The zoning board members weren't far behind, 3 arrests in total. Paul called me that afternoon. It's official, he said. They're going down. Mail fraud, wire fraud, document tampering, the works. The U.S. Attorney's Office wants you as a key witness. I didn't say much at first. I just looked out my window at the old oak tree in my backyard. The same one I used to sit under with Grandpa when I was a kid. You think they'll serve real time? I finally asked. Paul chuckled. Dakota, they built a whole town on stolen land. Yeah, I think they'll see the inside of a cell. That night, I drove back out to Birch Creek Estates. It was eerily quiet. Snow on the lawns, lights glowing in the windows. But the tension was thick. You could feel it from the street. Some folks peeked out through curtains as my truck rolled by. I didn't blame them. They didn't ask for any of this. At the far end of the subdivision, I stopped near a big wooden sign that read, "Welcome to Birch Creek Estates." A Goodwin community. Someone had spray painted over it in red. Thief's Creek. I stood there for a long minute, watching the wind blow through the snowdrifts. Then, I got back in my truck. 2 weeks later, the next court session began. This time federal and very different. Suits, microphones, sealed evidence files, and one very nervous row of defendants. The U.S. attorney laid it all out. Fraudulent land transfers, falsified permits, kickbacks to county officials, and money laundering through shell LLCs. It was bigger than I ever imagined. Eleanor wasn't just complicit. She'd been profiting directly, funneling HOA development fees into personal accounts. When they read the list of charges, her face went pale. When they mentioned the possible sentence, 15 to 25 years, she nearly collapsed. But what hit hardest wasn't seeing her fall. It was watching the homeowners realize the mess she'd dragged them into. People who thought they'd found their forever homes now faced the possibility of losing everything. After court, one of them, a young mom named Clara, stopped me in the parking lot. She looked exhausted, holding a toddler in one arm and a stack of papers in the other. "Mr. Flint," she said softly, "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know." I nodded. "You don't owe me an apology, ma'am. You were lied to, same as me." She smiled sadly. "We all just wanted a place to belong." That stuck with me. See, my fight had started over land, property, legacy, boundaries. But standing there in the cold, I realized it had become about something much bigger. Accountability. The idea that people like Eleanor, the ones who weaponize power and paperwork, shouldn't get to win just because the system is complicated. When the verdict came down, it was unanimous. Guilty on all counts. Eleanor's scream echoed across the courtroom when they cuffed her wrists. Her lawyer didn't say a word. Outside, reporters shouted questions at me again. One asked, "Mr. Flint, how does it feel to finally get justice?" I looked at the cameras, at the snow starting to fall again, and said, "It feels like my grandfather can finally rest." Because in the end, justice didn't come easy, but it came clean. 3 months after the verdict, Birch Creek Estates was a ghost town dressed up like a dream. Houses still stood, lawns still green, but half the driveways were empty. For sale signs leaned crooked in the snow. The HOA was dissolved by court order, and the bank accounts, every one of them, were frozen pending restitution. It should have felt like victory. But standing at the entrance that morning, watching the wind scatter old flyers for community pool grand opening, I felt something closer to melancholy. My land was mine again, sure, but it was scarred. Paul met me there with a thick envelope. "Judge signed the final order," he said, handing it to me. "Federal court recognizes you as sole owner of the property formerly known as Birch Creek Estates." I flipped through the pages. My grandfather's name at the top of the old deed. My own printed beneath it. 50 years between them. "Took half a century," I murmured, But the Flints finally got it back. Paul smiled. You earned it. They offered restitution too. About $8 million from what's left of Evergreen's accounts. I shook my head. Let it go to the homeowners. They'll need it more than I do. He raised an eyebrow. You're serious? Every dime, I said. They didn't build those houses. They just wanted a life. I'm not taking their roof away. That night, I walked through the empty streets alone. No cameras, no lawyers, no noise. Just the creak of porch swings and the hum of distant power lines. I stopped by what used to be Eleanor Goodwin's house, still the largest one, with marble pillars and a security camera blinking aimlessly in the dark. Her mailbox was stuffed with foreclosure notices and HOA circulars no one would ever read again. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Across the street, a family was still living in one of the smaller houses. Their lights were on. A father, mother, 2 kids at a kitchen table. Laughter floated through the window, soft, real. I stood there watching for a moment before moving on. You see, victory doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. It shows up as silence after years of noise, as space to breathe. A few weeks later, the county approached me with a proposal to rezone the land back to forest preserve, restore what was left of the pine trees. They offered to name the area Flint Reserve. I laughed at first, but the more I thought about it, the more it felt right. Grandpa would have liked that. He didn't believe in revenge. He believed in stewardship. The land doesn't belong to us, he used to say. We belong to it. So I signed the papers. By spring, the bulldozers came, not to destroy, but to return. Concrete was torn up, asphalt stripped, driveways flattened. Saplings went in where sidewalks once were. The houses were relocated, some bought back by developers who had no clue what they were stepping into. When the first pine tree was planted, I was there. I knelt down, dirt under my nails, wind cold against my neck. For the first time in years, it felt like the ground was breathing again. Paul joined me later, hands in his coat pockets. You ever going to build on it? He asked. I shook my head. No. Some things aren't meant to be built over again. He smiled. Then what'll you do now? I looked out at the land, my land. Same thing my grandfather did, I said. Keep it safe. And as I watched the sun dip behind the ridge, painting the snow gold, I realized something simple but profound. Justice isn't about reclaiming what's lost. It's about making sure no one else has to lose it again. Spring came early that year. The air in northern Colorado turned warm and clean. The snowmelt feeding streams that wound quietly through what used to be driveways. Nature was reclaiming Birch Creek estates one blade of grass at a time. Most of the houses were gone by then, auctioned, relocated, or dismantled. What remained looked like an archaeological site from a civilization that tried to outsmart the earth and lost. Stray patio chairs, broken mailboxes, a half-buried garden gnome staring up at the sky. I spent most mornings out there with a thermos of coffee and a pair of gloves, helping the restoration crew plant new trees. Hundreds of young pines, each one small enough to cup in your hand. Funny thing, when you plant a tree, you start thinking in decades, not days. One morning, a familiar car rolled up the dirt path. A silver Subaru packed with boxes and a car seat. Clara, the young mom from court, stepped out with her kids. Mind if we walk through? She asked. Not at all, I said, smiling. It's yours too, in a way. Her oldest, a boy about 8, ran ahead, jumping over a half-dug trench. Was this where our house was? He called out. Clara nodded. Right about there, buddy. Then she turned to me. We're moving up north. My husband found work in Cheyenne. I just wanted to say thank you. For what you did. For not letting them win, I nodded. You don't owe me thanks. You deserved better than what they sold you. She hesitated, then smiled softly. Maybe. But I think we'll remember this place for what it could have been, not what it was. After they left, I walked over to the spot where her house once stood. Now just a patch of turned soil and a few young saplings. I knelt and pressed my palm into the earth. It was soft, cool, alive. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about the Flints anymore. This was about every quiet landowner who'd ever been steamrolled by money and power. Every farmer, every builder, every person who'd been told to move on because someone richer had a plan. Grandpa used to say, "The land remembers." And standing there, I swear it did. You could almost feel it, like the soil was exhaling after years of suffocation. By summer, the first signs of the forest's return were impossible to ignore. Wild grass broke through the cracks in old pavement. Bluebirds nested in the frames of what used to be streetlights. And at dusk, deer started showing up again, nosing around the young pines. I'd built a small cabin on the ridge. Nothing fancy, just a one-room structure with a tin roof and a porch that faced west. From there, You could see the whole valley stretch out, green and wild again. Paul came by one afternoon with a cooler of beer. We sat on the porch steps, watching the wind ripple through the field where 96 houses once stood. You know, he said, most folks would have sold this land back for millions once the case ended. I smiled. Yeah, well, most folks didn't have a grandfather who taught them what real wealth looks like. He nodded slowly. So what now? You just gonna sit out here and watch trees grow? Maybe, I said, sipping my beer. Or maybe I'll start a foundation. Something for land preservation. Help people who can't fight back the way I could. He grinned. Sounds like you've got your next mission. I looked out over the horizon, the sun bleeding orange over the newly planted forest. No, I said quietly. I've got my legacy, because in the end, they built houses on my land, but I built something stronger. A story that couldn't be bulldozed, and a forest that would outlive every last brick they ever laid. A year later, the land was unrecognizable, in the best possible way. The old asphalt roads were gone, replaced by winding dirt trails lined with tall grass and pine saplings that reached shoulder height now. Birds sang where lawnmowers once roared. The sign at the entrance no longer said Birch Creek Estates. It read, simply, Flint Reserve, S. 2024. I walked those trails every morning, boots crunching through the dew, coffee steaming in hand. The air smelled like pine and rain, like home. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for the sounds of kids playing or dogs barking. But then I'd remember, this land wasn't for noise anymore. It was for peace. When I reached the ridge, I stopped at a small wooden bench carved with two names, William Flint and Dakota Flint. I sat there and watched the sun climb over the valley, lighting up miles of green. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I'd won something. I felt like I'd restored something. Grandpa's voice echoed in my head. Don't let the bastards take what's yours. I smiled. I didn't, old man. Not 1 inch. Later that afternoon, a local news crew came by to film a short piece about the restoration. The reporter asked, Mr. Flint, what do you hope this land becomes? I looked past her camera at the horizon, the wind carrying through the pines, the quiet hum of new life. A reminder, I said. That legacy isn't about what you build, it's about what you protect. She smiled and thanked me. The camera shut off, and for a long moment, all I heard was the sound of the forest breathing. Grandpa would have liked that silence.